Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Tim. I'm the host of the Glass House News Show and the CEO of Glass House Media. If you couldn't tell by the title of this video, we're going to do something a little different in this segment. This is going to be part one of a three-part series where I will be going through some of the cases of the more prominent pardons that Trump has committed to. So, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. It is most important that this information gets out because I'm about to go into a story that most Americans don't know about. And if they do, they likely don't know the truth behind it. So, without further ado, let's talk about who are the Biden for. It is Nicholas Slatton, served for 4 years in the U.S. Army. He was a sergeant, deployed twice to Iraq. Dustin Hurd served 4 years in U.S. Marine Corps. He was a corporal, deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Evan Liberty, he served 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was a sergeant, served at the U.S. Embassy Guard in Egypt and in Guatemala. And finally, Paul Slow. He served 4 years in the U.S. Army and National Guard. He was also a sergeant, and he deployed to Bosnia and Iraq. Now, the official story is this. The Nisour Square massacre occurred on September 16, 2007, when employees of Blackwater Security Consulting, a private military company contracted by the U.S. government to provide security services in Iraq, shot at Iraqi civilians, killing 17 and injuring 20 in Nisour Square, Baghdad, while escorting a U.S. embassy convoy. The killings outraged Iraqis and strained relations between Iraq and the United States. In 2014, 4 Blackwater employees were tried and convicted in U.S. federal court, one of murder and the other 3 of manslaughter and firearms charges. All 4 convicted were pardoned by the U.S. President Donald Trump in December 2020. So there's the official story, that these 4 men just shot into a crowd of innocent civilians for no reason at all. Well, as we're about to find out, not everything is as it seems. How did men like this wind up in prison? Experienced veterans, who were no strangers to combat, made split-second decisions in an Iraqi war zone during an emergency. After being honorably discharged from their respective military branches, all 4 veterans deployed to Iraq, serving under Blackwater's contract to protect State Department officials who came under attack. In September 2007, insurgents detonated a car bomb near the venue where a U.S. diplomat was conducting government business. The Blackwater Emergency Response Team, callsign Raven 23, deployed to secure the diplomat's safe return. After the team created a checkpoint in a traffic circle in Nisour Square, a white Kia drove toward their convoy and refused to stop. Raven 23 disabled the vehicle, but came under fire, which they returned, killing several Iraqis. A team vehicle was disabled by the incoming arms fire and had to be towed back to safety. A U.S. Army captain and West Point graduate who responded immediately to the scene interviewed Iraqi witnesses who confirmed that the vehicle had driven toward the Raven 23 convoy like a car bomb. Real-time radio logs and photographs of the disabled vehicle confirm that the team came under small arms fire during the attack. There was evidence that people were throwing Iraqi police uniforms over embankments around the square, suggesting that insurgents disguised themselves as police and used the embankments to cover and shoot at the enemy. So there you have it. That is the actual story. There's a lot more to it, and we'll go through it in a second. But first I want to tell you, these men were betrayed by our quote-unquote leaders. They were betrayed by the people they swore to protect. And if our leaders are going to betray these, the bravest of our country, what are they going to do to us? How did self-defense in a war zone turn into a prosecution? The United States government allowed the Iraqi police to conduct a corrupt investigation. The FBI largely outsourced the investigation to the Iraqi police, an organization infiltrated with anti-American insurgents. According to U.S. intelligence files, which were hidden from the defense for a decade. The man who led the Iraqi investigation, Colonel Faris Karim, may have collaborated with Iranian terrorist organizations. The Iraqi police collected almost all of the physical evidence, most of which disappeared. Advertisements on Iraqi television promised that compensation for persons who identified themselves to be victims of the incident. The Iraqi police identified the witnesses and claimed victims and coordinated their stories so that they would all claim that Raven 23 shot without provocation. Contrary to what untainted Iraqi witnesses told the U.S. Army captain at the scene, FBI investigators did not visit the site until several weeks after the incident. Left-leaning media and politicians relied on the corrupt investigation to urge prosecution. The New York Times, the Washington Post, along with other left-leaning outlets, injected politics into the incident by labeling these men as mercenaries and killers and using it as an indictment of Blackwater generally. Similarly, then-candidate Barack Obama made the incident a campaign issue, creating pressure on the Department of Justice to criminally charge the men here in the United States. There you have it again, Barack Obama blowing up a story, disregarding all of the facts for his own political gain. How did a U.S. court not immediately dismiss this case? It did. A federal district court in Washington, D.C. originally dismissed all charges based on constitutional rights violations by federal prosecutors. The district court dismissed the case for what found to be egregious constitutional violations, including improper use of compelled statements and the intentional withholding of exculpatory evidence and testimony from the grand jury. How did the case keep going? Iraq, Hillary Clinton, and then Vice President Joe Biden pushed further prosecution. Following heavy political pressure from Hillary Clinton and the Iraqi government, prosecutors appealed the case. Succumbing to that pressure, then Vice President Joe Biden even inserted himself into the prosecution, announcing the government's intention to appeal and to seek justice as long as it took, effectively declaring 4 decorated veterans guilty before the first witness ever took the stand. Biden overstepped his role and jettisoned the presumption of innocence during a press conference in Iraq. And this is how these 4 veterans came to be known as the Biden 4. What happened to the Biden 4 next? Prosecutors threatened them with unconscionably long prison sentences. The government threatened the Biden 4 with 30-year mandatory minimum sentences for using machine guns, even though they were required to carry machine guns by the State Department. These men were punished by our federal government for following federal regulations. The veterans refused to plead guilty, even in the face of 30-year prison sentences, because they believed the truth would set them free. Unfortunately, until yesterday, it did not. A civilian jury in Washington, D.C. convicted 3 of them of manslaughter. The prosecution manufactured venue in Washington, D.C. by arranging for a cooperating witness to fly there so he could be arrested in their preferred venue. As a result, the prosecutors tried the men who were from Tennessee, Texas, and New Hampshire in the most liberal, anti-military jurisdiction in the country. A civilian jury with no combat experience convicted Paul Slow, Dustin Hurd, and Evan Liberty of manslaughter. They ultimately received sentences of 12 to 15 years after an appeals court threw out their 30-year mandatory minimum sentence as cruel and unusual punishment under the United States Constitution. But that's only 3. Isn't it the Biden 4? What happened to Nick Slatton? After a federal court dismissed manslaughter charges against Nick for a second time, prosecutors charged Nick with first-degree murder of a man that he did not kill. Prosecutors charged Nick with manslaughter, but an appeals court dismissed the manslaughter case against Nick on statute of limitations grounds. The prosecutors individually pursued Nick even though they had acknowledged that the manslaughter charges against Nick were weak in comparison to the manslaughter charges against other men. Why? After experiencing immense political pressure, like Joe Biden's Iraqi press conference, and after being chastised by the left-leaning press, including the New York Times, prosecutors charged Nick with first-degree murder of the white Kia driver when Nick refused to waive his statute of limitations defense. And prosecutors did so without regard for the truth. There is overwhelming evidence that Nick did not kill the Kia driver. Here are just a few examples. One of Nick's teammates, Paul Slow, admitted to shooting the driver in self-defense. The FBI's former primary polygraph examiner concluded that Nick was telling the truth when he denied shooting the driver. And the driver's father refused to testify against Nick because the government told him that Slow killed his son. And every single eyewitness said Nick's teammate Slow was the shooter. The physical evidence, including ballistics and trajectory analysis, also corroborates that Nick's teammate, Slow, was the shooter and proves that the shot would not have been possible for Nick to have fired from his position in the convoy. And the evidence presented at trial accounts for the 2 shots Nick fired during the incident. Immediately after the incident, Nick told a teammate he had engaged in active shooter. After speaking with members of Raven 23, Department of State investigators went to the scene and recovered enemy shell casings in the precise location Nick had told his teammate he fired at an active shooter, which was obviously not the white Kia driver. After Nick's first conviction by a civilian jury was thrown out on appeal, and after a second civilian jury hung, a third civilian jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Nick received a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. How is this even possible? Government prosecutors repeatedly engaged in egregious misconduct in their vindictive quest for convictions. It would have been hard enough for these veterans to win their case before the government's hand-selected DC civilian juries. But they stood no chance against a government that refused to play by the rules. Here are just some of the things government prosecutors did to wrongly convict these decorated veterans. They hid evidence of insurgent provocation and attack. The prosecutors did not disclose the existence of photographs of AK-47 shell casings from enemy weapons found in the precise location from where men reported to take fire until the middle of the trial, leaving the defense no time to investigate. They hid intelligence information. The government hid from the defense for 10 years the intelligence information showing that the head of the Iraqi investigation, Colonel Karim, apparently had ties to terrorist organizations. They sided with the corrupt Colonel Karim over the U.S. Army captain. The government accused U.S. Army Captain Decaru of lying about his interviews with Iraqi witnesses who told him that the white Kia had driven towards the Raven 23 convoy like a car bomb, although they had no good faith basis to make such an accusation. Particularly as it is the U.S. government's fault that the contemporaneous notes Captain Decaru took during his interviews and turned over to his superiors were all destroyed. They hid exculpatory evidence and lied to the jury. In each of the trials, the prosecution presented the testimony of several key witnesses that conflicted with prior sworn statements that they had given. The government never disclosed these sworn statements to the defense. For example, the prosecutors falsely portrayed Nick as someone who shot without provocation and urged others to do the same. The prosecutors presented testimony from 2 cooperators, who were key witnesses against all 4 men, that Nick sparked a mass shooting by both Blackwater and the Army without any provocation the week before the Nisour Square incident. However, the government hid from Nick, his lawyers, the court, and the jury contemporaneous statements by the same witnesses that exonerated Nick. The witnesses told investigators under oath that the Army was engaged in firefight before Nick fired any shots, and that the Army identified armed combatants at the scene. The government also hid from Nick, his lawyers, the court, and the jury that government documents that included third-party accounts from Army officials, providing that the narrative presented through these witnesses was entirely false. And finally, they lied to the court. The prosecutors violated a court order by failing to instruct their most critical witnesses against Nick not to offer inflammatory speculation that had been excluded from Nick's case. After their witness nonetheless gave the inflammatory and excluded testimony, the district court found that the prosecutors had lied to the court about the reasons for their transgression. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama threw these men in jail for their own political gain. These men were used as political pawns, betrayed by their country, by their superiors. And if our leaders are going to do this, if our elected officials and representatives will do this to these men, what are they going to do to us? Thank God that Trump has pardoned these men. They didn't do anything wrong. They were accused of a crime they never committed. Like I said at the beginning of this video, please share this video with your friends. The truth needs to be heard. The truth needs to be told. Share this video with your friends, subscribe to my channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Please try not to burn down the country while I'm gone, and even if you do, I will be here tomorrow to cover it. Have a good night, have a Merry Christmas, and Merry Christmas Eve Eve.